Jenna Cartwright stood in her sunlit backyard, raising a glass to toast her loving family, unaware that her husband Mark and her sister Tessa had already destroyed it behind her back. By the time she put down that glass, everyone would know the truth, and the gathering meant to celebrate unity would become the moment everything unraveled. Jenna Cartwright had always believed she had built the life she was meant to live. Her marriage to Mark had the kind of stability people envied. He was dependable, well-spoken, and admired in their community for his work as an architect. They met in college, quickly fell in love, and had 2 children within the first 5 years of marriage. Their days were filled with school runs, shared routines, weekend trips to the lake, and holiday dinners that always took place in their home. Jenna, an elementary school teacher known for her warmth, loved the rhythm of her days. She was proud of their house, a 2-story brick home in a quiet New York suburb, where neighbors waved good morning and lawns were always freshly mowed. To outsiders, the Cartwrights looked like a family that had it all together. When Jenna's younger sister Tessa moved back into town, it was seen as a blessing. Tessa had been through a tough breakup with her fiancé and needed time to get back on her feet. Jenna welcomed her without hesitation. They had always been close, so close that people often thought they were twins, though they were 4 years apart. Jenna had helped raise Tessa when their mother was sick, and that bond never weakened. Tessa, with her lively spirit and charming wit, fit naturally into the Cartwright home. She'd swing by unannounced, bring pastries for the kids, and join them for dinner like she belonged there. Jenna didn't mind. In fact, it felt comforting to have her sister close again. For a few months, everything seemed normal, maybe even happier. Tessa's presence brought a buzz of energy into the house. She made everyone laugh, helped Jenna with chores, and often babysat the kids when Jenna and Mark needed a night out. But slowly, almost invisibly, something shifted. It wasn't obvious at first, just a sense that the air was different. Jenna started noticing small details, the kind most people would ignore. Tessa started wearing perfume Jenna had once liked but stopped using. Mark began dressing better on days Tessa was around. Jenna's instincts, the ones she had always trusted as a mother and wife, started whispering that something was wrong. She tried to brush it off. After all, she knew her husband. She trusted him. Mark had never given her a reason to doubt him, and Tessa had never crossed a line before. Still, there were moments that stayed in Jenna's mind longer than they should have. A passing glance between them, a laugh that felt too intimate, or the way Tessa's hand would rest just a second too long on Mark's shoulder. Jenna convinced herself it was nothing. She told herself she was imagining it. But the feeling refused to go away. It settled deep in her chest, heavy and cold. Mark, for his part, remained polite, considerate, and affectionate, but there was something missing behind his eyes. He seemed preoccupied, distracted, always checking his phone or zoning out during conversations. At first, Jenna thought it was work stress. He had a big project coming up, and he was known to get tunnel vision during those times. But then she noticed him becoming more secretive. His phone, once left casually on the kitchen counter, was now always in his pocket. He'd step outside to take calls. He started coming home later, blaming client meetings that never seemed to end. Jenna didn't want to believe anything bad was happening. She thought maybe she was tired, maybe even jealous of how much the kids loved Tessa. She chalked it up to anxiety and convinced herself it would pass. But deep down, her intuition had already begun to stir awake. It whispered louder with each passing day. Something was happening in her home, something she hadn't yet named, but that would soon become undeniable. And when the truth finally came to light, it would tear through everything she thought she knew about her marriage, her sister, and the life she thought was unshakable. Jenna began paying closer attention, though she tried not to let it consume her. Every interaction between Mark and Tessa became a moment to dissect. She watched the way they looked at each other, how often they were in the same room when she wasn't, She started remembering details she had once overlooked, like the time Mark laughed at a joke Tessa told that wasn't even funny, or how they once returned from a grocery run taking longer than seemed necessary. Still, there was no hard evidence, just a growing collection of doubts that she tried to push down. Her days continued as usual, packing lunches, grading papers, driving the kids to practice, but everything felt slightly off. She felt like an outsider in her own home, walking through scenes that no longer belonged to her. Every smile from Mark now looked rehearsed. Every compliment from Tessa sounded like a distraction. The house that once gave her peace began to feel like it was closing in on her. It all escalated the day Jenna noticed Tessa's sweater in the back seat of Mark's car. It was a small thing, almost forgettable, but it was a sweater Jenna hadn't seen her wear to the house. When she casually asked Tessa about it later, her answer came too quickly. She claimed she'd left it during a family dinner a week earlier. But Jenna knew that wasn't true. She remembered that dinner, remembered the dress Tessa wore. She said nothing and smiled, but her pulse had already started racing. The more she watched, the more inconsistencies surfaced. One evening, Jenna saw Mark delete a string of texts before setting his phone down. He hadn't realized she was standing behind him. Another day, she caught a glimpse of Tessa quickly closing an app on her phone when Jenna entered the room. There was a quiet tension between them now, something unspoken but thick in the air. Neither of them treated her any differently, but their politeness felt too careful, their interactions too practiced. Jenna started writing things down, dates, times, moments that didn't sit right. It wasn't something she told anyone about, not even her closest friends. She just needed to make sense of what was happening. But the more she documented, the more she saw a pattern forming. Tessa was always around when Mark was home. They'd both disappear for periods Jenna couldn't explain. And Mark had recently started using a new work phone, something he claimed was issued by the firm. The doubt that had once only whispered was now speaking clearly. Jenna felt a knot tightening in her stomach every day. It wasn't just fear of betrayal. It was the betrayal coming from the two people she trusted most in the world. She wanted to confront them, to ask directly, to scream and demand answers. But another part of her needed to be absolutely sure. She couldn't accuse them without proof, not of something this devastating. So she waited. And while she waited, she changed. Her warmth cooled, her expressions sharpened. She still smiled when she needed to, but behind her eyes, a storm was gathering. Jenna began to observe not as a wife or sister, but as a woman building a case. The lies had to be untangled one at a time. She started going through phone records, checking receipts, watching for small signs they'd overlooked. Every clue added weight to what she already feared. Still, nothing prepared her for what she'd find next. Because while Jenna was quietly trying to catch them, Mark and Tessa had already gone further than she imagined. And the truth was no longer just a suspicion. It was about to become undeniable and deeply cruel. Jenna reached a point where suspicion was no longer enough. She needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Her instincts told her something was terribly wrong, but she needed evidence, something she couldn't explain away, something that couldn't be denied. That's when she made a decision she never thought she would make in her own marriage. She began secretly gathering proof. She started with small steps. She checked Mark's call logs when he left his phone unattended. There were frequent calls to a number not saved in his contacts, always at strange hours, always brief. She copied the number and ran it through an online lookup tool. The name shocked her. It was registered to a prepaid phone under Tessa's old college email address. Jenna sat in silence, her chest tight. This wasn't just flirtation or carelessness. This was deliberate. This was hidden. The next day, Jenna installed a discreet camera in the corner of the living room. She told Mark and Tessa it was for the kids' safety when they were at school alone in the afternoons. Neither of them questioned it. That night, Jenna stayed up and watched the footage from the previous day. At first, it was nothing unusual. Mark working on his laptop, Tessa scrolling on her phone. Then, just before sunset, Mark walked over to the couch where Tessa was sitting. He leaned down, whispered something in her ear, and she laughed. The two of them held eye contact longer than any brother-in-law and sister-in-law ever should. Then, he kissed her. Jenna paused the footage and stared at the screen, unmoving. Her hands shook, but her mind was eerily still. There it was, undeniable, irreversible, documented truth. She watched it again to be sure she wasn't imagining it. But the screen didn't lie. Her husband and her sister had crossed a line they could never step back from. It was more than just one moment. Over the next few days, Jenna reviewed hours of footage and pieced together a timeline of quiet betrayals. They were careful, but not careful enough. They didn't know Jenna had stopped being the trusting wife and had become someone else entirely, someone determined to know everything. On Mark's laptop, she discovered even more. Hidden in a folder buried within another folder, there were pictures that made her sick. Mark and Tessa in what looked like a hotel room. Mark and Tessa on a hiking trail he told Jenna he'd gone to alone on a business retreat. Mark and Tessa kissing, holding hands, sitting on a bed. Every image chipped away at her remaining strength. She also found a plane ticket from 3 months earlier, booked under Mark's name, with Tessa's name listed as a companion. The trip had been short, 2 nights in a nearby city. He had told Jenna he was at a conference. Now, the truth was obvious. They had spent a weekend away together, pretending to be something they weren't allowed to be. Jenna didn't cry. Not immediately. She sat for a long time, letting the silence in the house surround her. Her children were asleep upstairs. Tessa was staying in her rented apartment across town now. Mark was still at work, and Jenna sat in the dark, holding all the pieces of a shattered life in her hands. But through the pain, something else began to form, resolve. She wouldn't let this break her. She wouldn't scream or beg or collapse. Instead, she would take control. If they wanted secrecy, she would give them exposure. And if they had made her life a performance, she would give them the final act. One they would never forget. The annual Cartwright family gathering was something everyone looked forward to. It had become tradition over the years, a summer afternoon filled with grilled food, laughter, children playing on the lawn, and old stories retold under string lights. This year was no different on the surface. The backyard was carefully decorated. Tables were arranged under a canopy, and Jenna had spent days preparing food, organizing games, and sending out invitations. She wore her favorite summer dress, smiled warmly at guests, and made sure everyone had a drink in their hand. No one suspected what was coming. Mark arrived late, blaming a work errand. Tessa came separately, wearing a bright floral dress and her usual radiant smile. They greeted each other casually in front of the guests, exchanging polite words and performing the roles of innocent family members. Jenna watched them carefully, noting every move. She knew this would be the last day. They got to pretend. As the afternoon unfolded, the mood remained light. Kids splashed in the inflatable pool, uncles debated baseball scores, and cousins snapped photos for social media. Mark mingled, oblivious to the trap set beneath his feet. Tessa floated between groups, laughing a little too loudly, unaware that her carefully built lie was moments from collapsing. Jenna waited until after dinner, when the sun began to dip and the family gathered near the patio for her usual toast. She tapped her glass, calling for everyone's attention. They all turned to her, expecting words of gratitude and affection. She stood confidently, her heart pounding but her expression calm. She started with the usual phrases, how grateful she was to have everyone there, how important family was to her. Then, her tone shifted subtly. She spoke of trust, loyalty, and how betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. It often comes from those sitting closest to you. Whispers began. Among the crowd, some glanced around nervously, sensing something wasn't right. Then Jenna picked up the remote. With one click, the backyard projector came to life. At first, everyone assumed it would be a slideshow of family photos. Instead, the screen filled with an image of Mark and Tessa seated together in a hotel room. A second photo followed, an embrace that was clearly not platonic. Then another, the two of them holding hands, smiling in a dim restaurant. The crowd went silent. Plates stopped clattering. Glasses hovered midair. Tessa froze, her expression draining of color. Mark looked at the screen in disbelief, as if his secret life was now betraying him in front of everyone he knew. Jenna stood quietly, letting the images speak for themselves. She said nothing more. She didn't need to. The silence broke with murmurs, gasps, and the quiet sobbing of a distant cousin. Tessa turned to run, but not before an aunt blocked her path and demanded answers. Mark tried to speak, but the words failed him. Jenna stayed still, her eyes fixed on the screen, as if erasing every lie with each flashing image. Within minutes, the gathering unraveled. Guests began leaving in stunned silence. Others stayed behind, offering Jenna hushed words of support and disbelief. Mark left without a word, barely able to meet his wife's eyes. Tessa disappeared through the side gate, her car speeding off down the quiet suburban street. Jenna remained on the patio long after the crowd dispersed. She watched the last image fade from the screen, one of Mark and Tessa smiling together, their expressions oblivious to what the future held. The backyard, once filled with noise and joy, was now hauntingly still. And though her heart ached, Jenna felt something powerful in that silence. The truth had finally been laid bare. In the days that followed the gathering, Jenna's world shifted into a quiet, unfamiliar rhythm. The house that once echoed with laughter and conversation now felt hollow. Mark moved out the very next morning without protest. He packed a suitcase in silence while the children were at school, not daring to offer excuses or apologies. Jenna didn't ask where he was going or how long he'd stay gone. The damage had been done. Words wouldn't fix it. Tessa vanished almost instantly. She didn't call or write. Her rented apartment was cleared out within a week. Neighbors said she left in the middle of the night, taking only what she could carry. Some believed she was hiding in shame. Others thought she had simply run away to avoid facing the consequences of her betrayal. Jenna didn't care where she went. Whatever bond they once shared was beyond repair. The silence from Tessa was louder than any apology could have been. Rumors spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Friends texted in disbelief, some offering sympathy, others prying for more details. At school, Jenna kept her head high, shielding herself from pitying glances and whispered gossip in the teacher's lounge. She didn't break down. She couldn't afford to. Her children still needed dinner, homework help, and bedtime stories. Their lives had to go on. Even if hers had splintered. One afternoon, a plain envelope appeared in Jenna's mailbox. No return address. Inside were printed photos, grainy but clear. Mark with another woman, this time someone unfamiliar. The timestamps were older than the affair with Tessa, suggesting that Mark's betrayal had begun long before her sister became involved. Jenna stared at the images, her fingers trembling. One photo showed him with a woman at a rooftop bar. Another captured them leaving a hotel. She realized the truth wasn't just about a single affair. Mark had been living multiple lives, and she had been nothing more than a fixture in one of them. The betrayal cut deeper with this revelation. Tessa's involvement had been the most painful, but now Jenna saw that it was part of a pattern, a history of lies and manipulation. Mark wasn't just unfaithful, he was calculated. He had orchestrated a double life beneath her nose, deceiving not just her, but everyone around them. Jenna filed for divorce the following week. There was no drawn-out fight. Mark didn't contest it. He signed the papers, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps because he knew there was nothing left to salvage. She kept the house in primary custody of the children. The home, once built as a monument to their life together, would now stand as a place of healing. She painted the walls, removed every photo of Mark, and threw out anything that reminded her of what they once pretended to be. In the months that followed, Jenna rebuilt slowly. Therapy sessions helped her untangle the emotional knots that remained. She found peace in small routines, morning walks, baking with her kids, reading, late into the night. The pain didn't vanish, but it softened. She learned to sit with it, to let it pass through rather than consume her. Tessa never returned. No one in the family heard from her again. Some said she moved to California, started over under a different name. Mark, too, disappeared from public life. After being outed online by other women he'd wronged, he lost several clients and quietly relocated out of state. Jenna never told her story publicly, never gave interviews or posted about it on social media. But everyone who attended that summer gathering remembered what happened. It became a quiet legend in their community, a reminder that even the most perfect lives can hide the darkest truths, and that sometimes the most brutal justice is the truth exposed in front of everyone who once believed in the lie.